last year, 23 states sued the federal government. At issue is a directive by the Department of Justice and Department of Education mandating that schools allow transgender students to use the bathrooms of their choice. The states protested, saying that such decisions were their call and that the federal government was overreaching. So the government was suing the government. But aren't they the same thing? Well, while some people might be confused about the difference between the state and the federal government, the Constitution actually spelled all of this out 228 years ago in the 10th Amendment. The founders understood that certain powers had to be delegated to a federal government. However, they were just as concerned, if not more so, about what the federal government should not be able to do. Thus, the 10th Amendment delineates the line between the state and the federal government, and this division of power has defined American government since day one. The 10th Amendment stipulates, the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited to it by the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. So the states have powers called reserved powers, such as issuing licenses and maintaining local schools. And the federal government has powers called delegated powers, which are outlined in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, such as declaring war and regulating trade. This system of government, called federalism, continues to govern our country to this very day. But this brings up an interesting point, because the 10th Amendment doesn't actually add anything to the Constitution. So why did the founders bother to include it? Well, the 10th Amendment serves to emphasize the limit on federal power. But in order to understand why the founders made this process this way, we must know the mentalities and conditions of the times. Following the revolution from Great Britain, our founders were very wary of overtly centralized power. Yet, they did not want the government to be too weak as it had been under the Articles of Confederation. They sought a balance between having a strong federal government and maintaining individual freedoms. As James Madison put it, the powers delegated by the Constitution to the federal government are few and defined, while those which are to remain in the state governments are numerous and indefinite. So, this is all really clear-cut, right? Well, any student of American history will tell you that no important power goes unchallenged. The pendulum of power has shifted back and forth between the states and the federal government, suiting to the needs of the times. In the early years of the Republic, our nation needed a strong federal government to hold the Union together. The federal government got most of its power from Supreme Court cases like McCulloch versus Maryland and Gibbons versus Ogden, which affirmed the federal government's superiority over the states. Yet, as time progressed, the pendulum started to shift the other way as the states began to reaffirm their rights. And this devolution of power reinstigated the competing relationship between the states and the federal government. And this actually boiled over in the Civil War, as many states continued to claim that the decision over slavery was their call. The early 20th century meant the pendulum shifted the other way, as widespread poverty demanded instant relief in the form of Franklin Delano Roosevelt's New Deal programs. And the pendulum has been swinging ever since. Almost since day one, politicians, judges, and just about all of us have wondered about the proper relationship between the state and the federal government, about issues such as gun control, transgender bathroom policy, and today, the enforcement of federal immigration law. But the center of this issue is not whether or not you agree. It's about who is in charge, the states or the federal government. Sure, we'll always fight these battles out in the courts, and no doubt this will continue. But the 10th Amendment sets the guidelines for resolving these conflicts of power and has been the guiding force for maintaining our American order for the last 228 years.